And so I wanted to do a live stream today to talk about two things that are interconnected, and it has a lot to do with the main focus of this channel when I do YouTube videos for Rick Wood's Nature Aware. I am usually focused on a troop of long-tailed macaques that live in North Jakarta. And I don't know if it always uh, kind of seeps in deep enough, but the reality is the monkeys, the long-tailed macaques that I do my observations on are wild animals. They're not in captivity in any way. They're not in a rescue setting. They're not even in a sanctuary. They're in a public park in a city of more than 11 million people. That is mind-boggling when you start to think about it, because it's really surrounded by urban growth and urbanized areas. So when I go to see the long-tailed macaque and I spend my time around the monkeys, I'm also traveling through thousands of people and thousands of cars. The traffic in Jakarta is really renowned for how bad it is. But it speaks to the volume of people that live here. So there are 11 million, 12 million people at any given time living in Jakarta, and North Jakarta is a part of that, main urbanized area. So these monkeys that I do my observations on, they live around people every day, and it's fascinating. I mean, it's the whole reason I started to study them. It's the whole reason I go to observe them. They are unique, but not completely unique. There are many different examples around the world of animals that are in the same situation, urban wildlife living in highly densely populated areas. So the first thing that I want to talk about today is, how did the Troop Bravo long-tailed macaques in North Jakarta, how did they end up as being in a urban wildlife setting? And to do that, you have to go back 400 years when the colonization of Indonesia took place through the Dutch, and the Dutch really built up Batavia, which eventually became Jakarta. And as they built up that area, which is on the coast, so Jakarta is actually on the coast, as they built up that area, that meant kind of reclaiming natural lands, and they, through the course of building up the city, have taken out a lot of the endemic mangrove forest and growth, all the wild spaces that exist in North Jakarta. So anyway, that left a lot of animals in a situation where they either had to move away to find other wild spaces, or find a smaller wild space to kind of hang out in. And that's how the long-tailed macaques that I observed ended up as a fragmented population. Now, that's a primatology term, fragmented, and it means exactly what you think it does. When you talk about a fragment, you're talking about a piece of a larger population broken off and separated. And these long-tailed macaques are fragmented, and they've been fragmented probably to this extent, to where they live now, for at least 100 years. So it's a long-standing thing. It's not a new problem. It's not something that just developed overnight. And the fragmented population of long-tailed macaques are thriving because they have a niche. They have a very special place in their tiny little ecosystem that they live in. So when we talk about urban wildlife, that's a growing issue across the world. It doesn't matter where you are. You could be here in Southeast Asia, you could be in North America, you could be in Europe, you can be in Africa, it doesn't matter. Urbanization will cause further and further fragmenting of different wildlife populations. And we see this impact across many different species. When I go to watch the monkeys, I also see the water monitor lizards, these giant reptiles that are, close to the same size as alligators, but not quite the size of Komodo dragons. But water monitor lizards can be more than 1.5 meters long. I mean, they can be really, really large. and big, and they are predators. And I'm starting to see actually seasonally more of these water monitors. And that may not be because locally they're just having more successful reproduction. That might actually be because other areas are pushing those lizards, those water monitor lizards, out from the urban areas, from the suburbs that are being created in North Jakarta, and pushing them down the canal system to the mangrove park where I watch the monkeys. Now, how that affects the monkeys is the long-tailed macaques, when they're small, are prey for water monitor lizards. They're potential prey. So they are a danger. And I see this quite a bit. Like I said, and it happens that I see the water monitor lizards a lot more when there's flooding, which happens in North Jakarta quite a bit. And they seem to have moved from other places because they're not coming here as like little lizards. They're already fully grown. So the way that I see it is I see the monkeys react to it. The long-tailed macaques will start doing alarm calls, which I don't hear because I'm actually deaf, but I can see their body language and I can see how they're reacting and what direction they start to look at. And if they start to all kind of stand on guard and head for higher ground and look towards the water, I know that something is coming from the water side into shore that they're afraid of. And that's usually not people. It's typically a water monitor lizard and very rarely crocodile, which are also endemic to this area. So that kind of leads into how everything's interconnected. So it's not just one species. In fact, no, I'm not plugging my book, but I was just thinking about my the third book that I wrote, which is called The Human Snare, which actually pertains, really talks about wildlife trafficking and poaching, but part of it makes sense for what I'm talking about today. So I was in Tanzania a few years ago, and I had a great opportunity. I got to meet with actual poachers, not former poachers, but people that were actively engaged in the poaching industry. As long as I didn't identify them, they would talk to me pretty openly. And one of the things that I want to talk about is how the movement of animals in these fragmented populations, including the monkeys that I observe, can lead to an uptick in poaching and wildlife trafficking. And this comes from my writing while I was in Africa, while I was in Tanzania. Poverty will always make people risk everything to provide for their families, if simply because they have nothing more to lose. Ivory from a poached elephant can be trafficked at such prices that even one poaching act will provide for a family for an entire year. And that was exceptionally true in Tanzania. The poaching is not something that the community supported. Poaching is not something that's culturally supported. It's a desperation act. And wildlife trafficking is the same way. So when I see monkeys here at the animal markets, they're being trafficked. They've been poached. Their mothers have been killed to take the babies, and they are being sold in wildlife trafficking. And not for vast amounts of money. They sell baby monkeys here for what amounts to $35 to $50 United States currency. It's just a tiny amount of profit when you think about having to take care of animals and how long they sit there before you actually sell them. So that kind of feeds into another part of the whole problem. So fragmented communities can't just thrive on their own, because eventually they become targets of wildlife trafficking, because then people actually know where to go to obtain the monkeys or to obtain the lizards, to obtain the birds, whatever they're going to try to bring into the wildlife trade. As populations get fragmented, it really puts them into a situation where those animals are available in one spot, and that's not a good thing for any of these animals, even especially small primates. I think another passage, different book, Rough Cut, a couple of books, or a couple of years ago, wrote this one. And actually, let me come back to this in a second because I want to finish the thought on wildlife trafficking. The long-tailed macaques that I observe are actually not regularly the victims of wildlife trafficking, and that's good for now. But there are other areas around Jakarta that actually have endemic populations, even though they're fragmented, they still have populations of long-tailed macaques and other primates. There are loris actually within the South Jakarta area and Central Jakarta, very fragmented. There are langurs, I mean, gibbons right outside of Jakarta. So, I mean, there are a lot of primates. And the ones that I watch are actually, even though they're separated from other groups, they're still within 1 or 2 kilometers of another fragmented population. I call them troop alpha. Troop alpha lives directly on the water in a mangrove park that's now closed to people, but they, still have the monkeys there. They still have the wildlife there. And it's places like that where the oversight has now been reduced away, and the government and the local law enforcement don't spend time or resources in that park. It becomes a very easy picking ground for wildlife trafficking if you want to do that sort of thing. And that's another part of the growing problem. And when I see this, I'm always confronted by it, and I get a lot of comments on this channel of people that ask me, well, I'm one person, I live in blah, blah, blah country. I don't live there. What can I do? I don't know where to start, blah, blah, blah. And that's why I wanted to reach you this second part, because I believe I shouldn't just identify problems. I should talk about what to do. And there are a lot of things you can do. In Rough Cut, this entire book is actually about ecology and endangered species. So I wasn't really talking about the wildlife trade, but it fits. I firmly believe that every bit helps. It's never about one seal or one turtle. It's not even about saving a special population of animals. The bottom line is that we will not save the world through some single silver bullet or a magic pill. We can only succeed by doing many, many small things every day. One person can have a huge impact over time, and collectively, it really adds up when we all get involved. And that is 100% true, especially when we're talking about animals and conservation. So what can one person do? Well, YouTube is a great place to start. I encourage you to vet the channels that you watch. I encourage you to spend the time to look at the videos that you watch, or if you're watching Reels or TikTok or anything like that, and realize that if you're watching an animal, that the person that created that video is probably making some sort of benefit off of showing you that animal. It's not always bad. And then, I show you the monkeys from True Bravo, but the nefarious side of it is, the evil side is that people know how to manipulate viral videos. They know how to use them to generate a lot of income, and especially with monkeys. And it's heartbreaking because I've been around small primates. I've been an observer officially through organizations like the Jane Goodall Institute. I did the chimpanzee as an observer for years. Primates are not meant to be showpieces. They're not props to bring onto YouTube. They're not toys to be dressed in doll clothes. They're not made for our amusement. They live these dynamic social lives. Social lives that when they're taking out of that, when you take a monkey away from its group, their family or whatever, you're damaging the potential of that being. You're damaging their psychological potential. You're damaging their health potential. You're damaging their well-being. No matter how much you love that pet monkey, no matter how much you love monkeys in general, it doesn't help them to take them away from the wild environment. I'm not talking about rescues. Rescues are a whole different thing. But I'm talking about people that are buying pets and then going on YouTube, throwing a dress on them and making them dance and walk bipedally and all the neat, fun stuff that is completely wrong for small primates. And then the money that's involved in that is literally billions of dollars. And animal trafficking is all about money. It's not about loving animals. It's not about enjoying seeing animals. It's about using animals as a commodity. It's about using animals the same way that you would use handmade soaps and sell them to people, because that's all you're doing is you're producing a product. So the way that everybody that's watching this, the way everybody can help in some way, is to stop watching everything that comes across your screen and take a moment to vet that. Check out the channel, look at it. If it's a bunch of borrowed videos from a million different monkey owners, chances are that person doesn't care at all about monkeys, and what they're showing you is hurting those monkeys. And that's actually a lot more true than you realize. It's not just direct abuse that you have to be worried about. So, the spanking of I was about to say spank the monkey. Hitting monkeys, throwing them, doing that stuff happens. But the abuse is also taking the monkey out of its natural environment, putting it into a dress, making it walk around and act like a person, giving it a baby doll to hold on to, so that people will sit there by the millions and watch 2-3 minutes of it, and they get subscribers and they get millions of views and they rake in a ton of money, and that money doesn't go to the monkeys. It never goes to the monkeys. I don't even care if the person that owns the monkey has posted the video. The monkey is not benefiting from that, ever, not ever. So my encouragement on the first section is to go ahead and to start taking a more critical look at the media that you're absorbing, because you're the buyer of a product, ads, subscriptions, whatever. I mean, you're putting money into a system. And then the next thing is, no matter where you live, you can also talk to people about monkeys and encourage them to learn more about natural ecology and about the situation of primates. So long-tailed macaques 5 years ago, nobody really was too upset about their situation. Nobody was overly concerned that they might go extinct one day. And then the pandemic happened. And during the pandemic, governments paid huge sums of money to remove hundreds of thousands of long-tailed macaques out of the natural environment, paying local people ridiculous amounts of money that they couldn't turn away from, because, like I read to you before, wildlife trafficking is a poverty issue. And they took these monkeys out by the hundreds of thousands, and they put them into research labs to test vaccine components and other things to go along with biomedical research, and they're still in the labs, and they're still taking the monkeys out, and they're still taking thousands of these monkeys. And it was so damaging to start to hit the long-tailed macaque population with this research need, that they went from being least concern. When you talk about ratings of animals, you have least concern, you have endangered, you have threatened, you have these levels. They used to be a least concern animal. They're now endangered species. Long-tailed macaques are endangered species. And that's insane. If you've lived in Asia and you knew the population 10 years ago, there were millions. We knew there were millions of long-tailed macaques, and now that number is plummeting. And it's plummeting so fast that scientists can't even get an accurate count of how bad that is. And you couple that, the wildlife trade, with urbanization, and that's how you end up in a situation where, when I'm watching Troop Bravo, when I'm watching the long-tailed macaques that I've observed for the past 3 years, this wild population of 25 monkeys is one bad month. They are always one bad month away from being eradicated. And that's not just me putting out some, big dramatic statement. That actually almost happened to them last year, when there was a couple of incidents of monkey versus human conflict that led to aggression and scratching and biting attacks. The result was a humane result, but it was the local government decided they were going to go ahead, trap, and move the entire troop out of the area, which luckily got intervened with, and many organizations came into play and jumped in to help do non-invasive sterilization, to control population on a certain number of the trip, to put up new signage throughout the park to start to educate people on how to interact with the monkeys, because monkey human aggression is very rarely just spontaneous. It always kind of has triggers. And I would say 99% of the time it's triggered by people not understanding how to interact with monkeys, invading their space, staring at them, trying to throw food at them, trying to get them to come take pictures, to pet them, whatever, put the children next to them. All kinds of goofy stuff. Doesn't need to happen. They put the signage up. They partnered with organizations. They released the monkeys back into the mangrove park. And now Troop Bravo is not only still thriving, but their numbers are growing in a measured amount. They have 5 babies right now. And that'll balance itself off as older macaques pass away. And long-tailed macaques have about 20%, by statistics, they have about 20% that don't reach adulthood. So that number will balance back down to about 23 or so, which is a healthy number for that environment. How long that'll remain will always be in the hands of human beings. How long those monkeys will have a safe and productive habitat to live in will always be in the hands of human beings, because they live in the middle of a city of 12 million people. That's why I do what I do. I educate. I don't know if I'm reaching people. I don't know if anybody really takes it in and cares so much. But, I see one comment that somebody says they heard that they eat their young. No, long-tailed macaques do not eat their young. However, infanticide does happen. Infanticide is done primarily by males that become aggressive and attack the babies to bring the females back into a reproductive state so that they can have copulate with them and sire children. That happens very rarely. With Troop Bravo, I've seen one incident in 3 years. Eating young, that's kind of a mythology, unless you have a very aberrant situation where they are literally starving to death. I can't imagine they would eat their young, because they're not carnivores. They are not strictly herbivores, they're omnivores, but they eat more than 90% of their diet is leaves and fruits and stems and roots and stuff like that. And of the meat that they eat, it's mostly insects and mollusks. So probably not eating the young. Thank you for the comment on the shirt. I bought this locally here in Jakarta. There are actually a lot of Indonesians that care about their wildlife. There are a lot of Indonesians that work very hard, and organizations like IAR, Indonesian Animal Rescue, Jakarta Area Animal Network, JAAN. A lot of Indonesian people that are fighting really hard to protect their natural resources out here. I'm not so much an activist. I've always been a writer and photographer. I went deaf about 20 years ago. I started to go deaf, and about 10 years ago I pretty much became functionally deaf. And it pushed me to take my camera out and travel. And yes, I'm holding the book up again, but I just want to mention this because books like this, Rough Cut, Lessons from Endangered Species, The Human Snare, they come from years of traveling around the world. I have worked with the giant pandas in China. I've worked with Kilimanjaro Animal Crew to help orphan elephants and monkeys in Tanzania, mostly vervet monkeys. I went to Costa Rica, helped out with spider monkeys in the arenal, in the rainforest. I did volunteering there. I volunteered in an animal hospital in San Jose, Costa Rica, mostly with sloths. And I did 10 years of marine rescue, marine mammal rescue, whale entanglement rescue in Washington State and Canada, in the Pacific Northwest, also in California. So I've, really brought all of those experiences into what I write about, which is kind of more why I talk about and I go out and I do what I do. Watching monkeys for me is a hobby. I have to make that clear. I don't get paid for it. I'm not sponsored. I'm not part of an organization. I'm an individual with a scientific background that goes out and does a visual observation of long-tailed macaques. And I do that so that I can turn around and show you guys that long-tailed macaques are beautiful creatures. They're intelligent creatures. They're playful creatures. They get into a lot of shenanigans, and they're worth saving. So thank you, everybody who tuned in. I appreciate it. Everybody take care. Peace.